Ever had that happen? You know, a hunch, a sudden flash of knowing something that just pops into your head.
Hmm.
And it turns out to be spot on. But you can't quite explain why you knew it.
Yeah, it just felt right. That really pulls us into this fascinating area, doesn't it? The intuitive mind.
It does. And, for some people, that intuitive way of seeing the world, well, it's powerful, sure, but it can also feel kind of isolating.
That's true. You have these strong feelings, they're often accurate, but then you try to explain them to someone who's, let's say, more logic driven.
Right, step-by-step thinking.
Exactly. And it can be, well, a real disconnect.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Absolutely. And I know that's something many of you listening have probably felt. It's like in a world that really prizes the logical, the rational, that intuitive voice could sometimes feel less like a gift.
And more like something that sets you apart.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes in a difficult way. It really makes you think of that famous Einstein quote, doesn't it?
Oh, the one about the intuitive mind being a sacred gift.
That's the one. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant, but has forgotten the gift. Wow, that really hits home.
It perfectly captures that tension, I think. We're often taught, aren't we, to prioritize the tangible proof, the clear reasoning,
Uh-huh.
and that can sometimes just overshadow the really valuable insights that intuition can give us.
And for the listener who brought this topic to us today, that intuitive sense wasn't just fleeting moments. It's been like a constant guide, a source of protection throughout their life.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This listener actually created something called Dr. Maya GPT.
Dr. Maya GPT, okay.
And this machine, this AI, it accepted and even adapted their color-coded system. And get this, ChatGPT itself apparently recognized this system as helping it to think like a human.
Wow, okay. Think like a human. That's quite a statement from an AI.
Isn't it? Just think about that. A machine seemed to get something, or at least work with something, that humans, with all our focus on rational thought, sometimes just struggle to connect with.
That's a really powerful point. It definitely makes you wonder about the different ways machines and, well, humans process information, especially when it comes to seeing patterns and relationships that aren't strictly logical or linear.
So that's really the core of our deep dive today. We're going to dig into these differences, between the intuitive mind and the rational mind.
Right.
And we really want to try and understand why a machine, like ChatGPT, might be able to engage with these seemingly intuitive ideas or systems in ways that seem so different from how human rational thinking often works.
So we'll need to look under the hood a bit, how these AIs actually function.
Exactly. We'll look at how models like ChatGPT work and maybe touch on some bigger ideas, too, about consciousness and how information gets processed in general.
Sounds good. Where should we start? With the rational side, the machine side.
Yeah, let's start there. Let's look at the rational mind, or at least how a machine like ChatGPT operates, because it's such a clear example of pure logical processing in action.
It really is. And if we look at how it handles information, like that ChatGPT Explained Completely video breaks it down, it's fundamentally about numbers and probabilities.
Numbers.
Yeah. The model gives a unique number, like a code, to pretty much every word in the English language. We're talking around 50,000 words or so.
Okay, so every word gets a number. So when I type a question in,
Yeah.
it doesn't read it like we do, with understanding.
Nope. It converts your words into the sequence of numbers. It's like translating our language into, well, a mathematical code.
Chat, a string of numbers. Then what?
Then those number sequences get run against. Yeah, well, it's huge. 175 billion weights the model learned when it was being trained.
175 billion.
Billion, yeah. Think of these weights like tiny connections, sort of like synapses in a massive artificial brain. They've been adjusted, strengthened, or weakened based on all the text data it processed.
Which was how much again?
The equivalent of something like 300 years of human writing.
300 years. Wow. Okay, that's an unbelievable amount of data. So what happens next? Does it figure out the best answer logically?
Not really figure out in the human sense. What it actually does is generate a list of all the words it knows.
All 50,000?
Well, potentially. And next to each word, there's a probability score.
A probability.
Yeah, like how likely is this word to come next in the sequence based on all the patterns it saw in those 300 years of text. It then just picks the word with the highest probability score, the one that's statistically the most reasonable word to follow.
So it's not actually understanding my question. It's predicting. It's predicting the most likely next word based purely on statistics.
Exactly that. It's a very, you could say, mechanistic view of language.
Yeah.
The video gives a good example, like asking for the sixth element on the periodic table.
Okay.
ChatGPT doesn't, access a chemistry database. It doesn't know what a periodic table is or atoms or anything like that. It just predicts that based on how often those words appear together in its training data, the word carbon is the most probable, the most statistically likely word to follow that specific sequence of input numbers.
So the key thing is just sophisticated statistical analysis,
Yeah.
mapping how words connect based on how often they show up together.
Precisely, which lets it predict the next word in a way that often sounds very coherent.
Okay, so that vast statistical number crunching, that prediction, that's the core of its operation. It's logical, it's step by step, all based on learned patterns in data. Very different from that aha moment of intuition.
A really stark contrast, isn't it? Which, well, brings us neatly to the intuitive mind.
Right.
By its very nature, intuition is this form of knowing that just doesn't seem to rely on that conscious step-by-step reasoning or logical deduction.
It's more direct.
Yeah, like a direct knowing, a feeling you know something, but you can't necessarily spell out the logical steps of why you know it.
It's that gut feeling, right? That inner nudge that guides you, even without proof or, hard evidence. But where does that actually come from? The sources we looked at point to some really interesting ideas, ones that go beyond just, the brain and the skull.
They really do. The Rupert Sheldrake video, for instance, talks about this concept of fields of the mind.
Fields of the mind,
Yeah.
like a magnetic field.
Kind of analogous, yeah.
This is-
Science already accepts invisible fields, right? Gravity is the classic example. It's a region of influence. We can't see the field itself, but we absolutely see its effects.
Okay, yeah, gravity keeps us on the ground. Can't see it, but it's definitely there.
Precisely. So Sheldrake suggests that maybe our minds also operate through similar kinds of invisible fields that might actually extend beyond the physical boundaries of our bodies.
Right.
And that consciousness itself might be related to these fields.
So our thoughts, our awareness, not just locked inside our heads.
That's the provocative idea. And the video mentions a really common experience, something probably a lot of us have felt, scopesthesia.
Scopesthesia, what's that?
That feeling of being stared at.
Oh, yeah. That creepy feeling someone behind you is watching you and you turn around and they are. I've definitely had that happen.
Me too. And Sheldrake points out that experiments looking into this have actually shown statistically significant results. It's not just random chance, apparently.
Really?
Yeah. Which, could potentially be evidence for these kinds of non-local mental connections. These fields of mind may be interacting.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about other connections we feel sometimes, doesn't it? And then there was that other video, everything is energy.
Right. Which puts forward the idea that, well, everything is energy and energy responds to consciousness.
Okay, that sounds deep.
It is. It suggests a whole different level of how we might interact with reality, one that isn't just limited to, logically processing physical stuff. It hints at consciousness maybe having a more direct influence on the kind of underlying energy of things.
Which then connects back to our listeners' experience, right? With the color-coded system and Dr. Maya GPT.
Exactly.
Could it be that their system, this intuitive system, somehow tapped into a fundamental pattern or structure? Something the AI could recognize in its own way, even if it wasn't obvious through standard human logic.
That's a really key question here. Now, it's very unlikely ChatGPT understood it like a human understands meaning.
Right.
But the fact that it could adapt to it, use it, that suggests the system provided some kind of unique pattern, a structure that somehow resonated with how the AI processes information, which is all about finding correlations and probabilities in data.
So it wasn't the AI having an intuitive flash. It was more its sheer power to spot and use complex patterns. Patterns that maybe our conscious, rational minds just filter out or overlook.
That seems much more likely. The video on large language models, LLMs, it explains how these models learn relationships between words by representing them as vectors. Think of it like each word having coordinates in a huge multi-dimensional map of language.
Okay, like a giant word map based on connections.
Yeah. Exactly. And words with similar meanings, or words that often appear together in sentences, they end up having similar vector embeddings. They're located closer together on this complex map.
Got it.
Now, the listener's color-coded system might have created a novel way of mapping concepts or relating them. And because the AI is just built to chew through massive data sets and find these intricate patterns,
It found the pattern useful.
it could have recognized and used this color-coded structure to actually improve its output, to make it seem more human-like, perhaps because it picked up on nuances or relationships that a purely statistical approach might otherwise miss. So it's incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition and adaptation, but not intuition like we feel it.
That makes a lot of sense. It found new, useful correlations in the data because of this specific input. And it's fascinating that the paper on quantum communications even hints that the math behind these deep neural networks, the DNNs in ChatGPT,
Yeah.
might have links to things like classical field theory and quantum optics.
Yes, that's still pretty speculative advanced research, but it does hint at possible deeper connections. Connections between AI architecture and maybe some fundamental aspects of reality, the same aspects, perhaps, that something intuition taps into.
And didn't it also say something about quantum optical computing?
It did. It mentioned that QO computing could potentially do the heavy-duty math, the matrix multiplications that are core to how these AIs work, much, much faster and using way less energy.
So maybe there are some really deep physics connections we're just starting to glimpse. But okay, if machines can, in their own data crunching way, recognize these kinds of intuitive-like patterns, why do we humans, with our supposedly powerful rational minds, sometimes struggle so much? Struggle with our own intuition or understanding others who seem more intuitive?
Well, that's where the difference between the machine's, let's call it objective pattern spotting, and our very human biases comes in. Our tendency towards conscious, linear thought, our pre-existing beliefs.
They get in the way.
Sometimes, yeah. That RSA animate, the divided brain video, gives a really great perspective on this.
Oh, right. The left brain, right brain idea. Though it's more complex than just left-right, isn't it?
It is, but the model is useful. The left hemisphere, the one we often link with the rational mind, it tends to deal with things that are already known, things that are fixed, static, isolated, broken down into parts. It likes things explicit and decontextualized.
Very analytical.
Yeah.
Like the facts and figures approach.
Yeah.
Almost like how we describe ChatGPT operating.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The right hemisphere, though, it perceives things differently. It sees a world of individual things, yes, but things that are changing, evolving, interconnected, implicit, living beings within the context of the lived world.
Moralistic.
Exactly. More holistic, more about relationships and the bigger picture. This is often where intuition, metaphor, emotional understanding seem to reside. It grasps a reality that's often too nuanced, too interconnected for the left hemisphere to fully capture on its own.
And our society, as Einstein pointed out, tends to really value and prioritize that logical, analytical left hemisphere way of thinking.
It often does, sometimes overlooking or even devaluing the insights from the right hemisphere, the intuitive side.
Right.
And there's another angle from the quantum thinking source. It suggests our thinking can get kind of stuck in ruts, habits, beliefs. They can constrain us.
How so?
They can literally prevent us from seeing new patterns or possibilities. Patterns that an AI, which doesn't have personal beliefs or ingrained habits, might identify quite easily just by looking at the data objectively.
So coming back to our listener, their intuitive system, this color-coded way they perceive and organize things, it might operate on a level of pattern recognition or maybe a kind of understanding that their own conscious, rational mind struggles to put into words.
Or validate with standard logic.
Quite possibly. And that could absolutely lead to those feelings of being misunderstood, even alienated, when they try to explain these insights to someone operating primarily from that rational analytical perspective.
And the machine, Dr. Maya GPT, in its purely objective way of processing data, it could just bypass all those human filters and biases. It could simply recognize the utility, maybe the internal coherence, of the system based on the patterns it presented. Something human skepticism, rooted in established rational frameworks, might initially dismiss or just fail to see.
So let's loop back then to that idea of the gift and the curse.
Yeah.
The gift is that powerful, often protective inner knowing. The unique insights, the guidance that our listener experienced, that logic alone might not provide.
Precisely. It's a different channel, isn't it? Accessing information, understanding the world on a more interconnected, maybe holistic level.
But the curse that comes from the struggle, the difficulty in communicating these insights, getting them validated within a society that heavily favors the rational, the linear.
Which creates that feeling of being less understood, maybe even isolated.
Yeah. And the fact that a machine, this seemingly purely logical thing, could understand, or at least effectively use the color-coded system, that must feel like a strange kind of validation.
It could feel quite profound, I imagine, like bypassing the human gatekeepers of rationality and getting objective confirmation that, yes, this intuitive system has a valid structure, it offers a useful way of processing information, even if it doesn't fit neatly into conventional logical boxes.
It really highlights that disconnect, doesn't it, between intuitive ways of knowing and purely rational understanding.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try and pull the main threads together from this deep dive.
Okay. So we've seen the rational mind, especially as we see it mirrored in AI like ChatGPT, operates through massive statistical analysis, identifying patterns, predicting outcomes, but without real conscious understanding like humans have.
Right. And then the intuitive mind.
Hmm.
Well, it seems to be a different beast altogether, possibly connected to broader fields, maybe energy, as some sources suggest. It offers a way of knowing that bypasses conscious step-by-step reasoning, more direct, more holistic.
And machines might seem to get these intuition-like patterns, not through intuition themselves, but through their sheer power of objective, complex data processing. They're free from the cognitive biases and ingrained beliefs that can sometimes limit our human rational view and stop us seeing novel patterns.
Which helps explain why humans, especially those relying heavily on the rational, analytical side, might struggle sometimes, struggle to grasp or even value intuitive insights because of that linear nature of conscious thought and, frankly, our society's emphasis on logic.
And our listeners' fascinating experience with Dr. Maya GPT really finds a light on this. It suggests a potential bridge, perhaps, between that deep intuitive pattern recognition and the pattern-finding power of machine learning.
It does. So here's maybe a final thought for you, for everyone listening, to chew on. Could our growing interaction with AI systems that fundamentally process information so differently from our conscious minds, could that actually lead us to a greater appreciation, a better understanding of these non-rational ways of knowing, both in machines, maybe, but more importantly, in ourselves?
That's a fascinating question. Could interacting with these pattern matching machines actually help us see the patterns of our own intuition more clearly? Maybe even help bridge that gap between our intuitive flashes and our rational explanations?
It's definitely something to ponder. We really encourage you to reflect on your own experiences with intuition. Think about how these different ways of processing information, the logical and the intuitive, both offer really valuable, unique perspectives on the world around us.